everyone. I'm Derek Young, and I have the privilege of being one of the founding members and the chairperson of the Asia Alumni Board for Owen. And it's just a privilege to be here with you right now and to be able to share something that hopefully everyone is going to find very special. We got a lot of participants who are joining us tonight, which is outstanding, tonight in Asia, I should say. And also we have some representatives from our Asia Alumni Board who will be on this panel. But more importantly, I would like to kick the panel off by turning it over to Stacie Pawlicki. And Stacie is actually the director for the Vanderbilt Center for Entrepreneurship. I've had the opportunity to see Stacie present to us before in terms of what she's doing. Very impressive background. I will encourage you to go to LinkedIn and connect with Stacie as I have, and you'll see it yourself in person. But with that, Stacie, I'll turn it over to you and let you take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Derek, and very excited to be joining everybody today and kicking off our Owen-Owned APAC Entrepreneurship panel. So as Derek said, it may be morning or evening, depending on where you're located, but we're really excited to be here to talk to you today about a really interesting topic, which is entrepreneurship in Asia, and to learn from some of our distinguished alumni. So for those who don't know me yet, I am Stacie Pawlicki. I'm the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship. I'm also a Vanderbilt alum, a two-time founder and lifelong entrepreneur myself, and I'm very passionate about the mission of the Center for Entrepreneurship and how we act as a connection point for students and alumni in our Vanderbilt entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so for those who are just hearing the word Center for Entrepreneurship, to share a little bit about what we do, we really strive to accomplish our mission through collaborative efforts, whether that be structured programs, financial support through grants and scholarships, network connections with alumni and other members of our community, speaking engagements, pitch competitions, and even an annual conference that we'll actually be hosting February 18th, 2022. A little plug to mark your calendar. We'll be doing it both virtual and in person. And we really strive at the Center for Entrepreneurship to be that starting point to help those who want to either start a company themselves, join a startup, or pursue a career in venture capital. And so, that's a little bit about the center, but I do also encourage you to go to our website. It's vanderbiltc4e.com. And you can find out a little bit more or reach out to me directly as well. Would love to speak with you. So enough about me and the center. Before we kick into some of our panel questions, I do want to kick it off by asking each one of our panelists to just give a quick, maybe 1 minute introduction of yourselves so everybody knows who we have joining us today. So Austin, would you mind kicking us off with telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was a member of the class 1995. That's many years ago for sure. I have the pleasure joining Owen in my young age. I learned a lot at Owen. After graduation from Owen in '95, I joined Xiaoyan Brothers in New York. I think I was among the group of Chinese people ever working on Wall Street back, that's almost more than 2 decades ago. So I worked for Xiaoyan Brothers until '97. So the organization became part of Citigroup, and I got transferred back to Hong Kong actually with Citigroup. I myself, I left Citigroup in year 2000, started my own. Now, I guess today's topic is about the entrepreneurship. So that's when I left Citigroup, started something on my own. And then I invested in a company called Onet, and in year 2000. So a year later, I took over the company. I became the chairman and CEO of that company. It was focusing on fiber optics. So I built it up, the company. I took it public in 2010 on Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And then diversify the business to fiber optics, sensors, and today I guess LiDAR is another hot topic in the industry. And then I privatized the company last year. So now we are in the process of, I guess I'm going to try to take it public again, maybe later part of next year. So it's a company about 6,000 employees, $500 million US dollar annual revenue, so sort of a medium size. But we do operate, R&D centers in China, Silicon Valley, Montreal, Ottawa, Paris. So it's a sort of an international company focusing on high tech. So guys, I probably extended 1 minute.
No,
so
that's okay.
I'll shut up here. Let others to speak.
Not at all, Austin. Great, very impressive background. So thank you for sharing that. Anand, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background?
Sure. Like Derek, I think I'm sort of we're in the oldest class of alums here, class of 91. I, like Austin, started my career in banking in New York with a French firm called Paribas. And I started off as a trader. A couple of years later, they were looking around for someone who looked Asian and Indian, because they were looking at building out a business in Singapore, targeting Indian companies that were looking to raise money offshore. And so I put my hand up, and they moved me out to Singapore, and I've spent the next 25, 26 odd years based out of here in Singapore. I spent about 23 years in banking. I moved from Paribas into Morgan Stanley, and then at Standard Chartered for many years before starting my own private equity business, along with a few former colleagues. And we essentially look at investing in Africa, Middle East, South and Southeast Asia. And we essentially provide growth capital to entrepreneurs in this geographic footprint. We're also building out a credit business, given that there's a huge shortage of credit in the African subcontinent. So we are targeting to raise a credit fund. We just launched it a few months ago, and we're looking at setting up essentially a credit fund to provide very hard to access credit in most of these markets. So that's in a nutshell what I've been up to in the last 30 odd years since leaving Owen.
Thank you for that background. Also very impressive. Prashant, would you jump in next and give a little intro?
Certainly, thanks, Stacie. So far it seems I'm the youngest of the alums here, having graduated in '98. Was fortunate to receive a full scholarship to pursue my MBA at Owen, which made it possible. After Owen, I spent 2 years in Boston at State Street Global Advisors, and then joined Goldman Sachs Asset Management in 2000. Spent 6 years in their US equities team. I've always been on the buy side, so I was managing US equity money for the clients in US in the asset management division there. Then wanted to move back to India, and coincidentally at the same time Goldman was starting business in India in 2005-06 timeframe. So I was asked to lead that effort. I started and led the build out of asset management business in India, which I continued to do till I left, till 2017. But along the way was also made head of global emerging markets, and that role moved to Singapore in 2013. Living in the same town as Anand for the last 8 years now. And in 2017, finally left Goldman to pursue my long-held desire or aspiration to start my own investment management firm, White Oak Capital. Over the last 4.5 years, we've had good performance, and on the back of it have raised close to 6 billion, or $5.8 billion to be more precise. All this is money invested in Indian equities. A lot of the money, nearly 75%, is raised from investors outside India, with whom I've interacted now for the last 20 plus years. But a good chunk of the money is raised from domestic market as well. And we are soon to launch the retail-oriented asset management company in India.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Xiaoyan, would you provide a little bit about your background?
Hi, I graduated from Owen in 2001. This is following Prashant, just a couple of years after, but we didn't overlap, obviously. And after graduation, I went to Deloitte Consulting as the consultant, as a strategic consulting side. And after that, I joined GE Capital. And the GE sent me to Asia in 2005, and I was in Tokyo. That's where Derek is now, for about 2 years, working as an investment manager for GE Capital. And after I made the first investment for GE real estate in China, then GE sent me to Hong Kong. So I was expatriated to Hong Kong again. And then I was in Hong Kong for 10 years. So Hong Kong is actually my second home. And then when I was in Hong Kong, I left GE Capital to join Deutsche Bank. So joining the banking side. I was a coverage person for Deutsche Bank Asia real estate. And then 3 years later in 2010, I left Deutsche Bank to join BNP Paribas as a head of real estate for Asia. And then later I was also made the head of consumer and TMT for BNP Paribas. And 2000, I was in BNP for 8 years, for 6 years. 6 years later, I was transferred to New York. So I was back to the US again after 11 years away from the US and back to New York. And I was the head of Asia multinational banking to start the China desk for BNP. And I was here for 2 years before I left and co-founded the firm called the Prime Number Capital, which is a boutique investment bank focused on cross-border transactions, really bridging the gap between US and China for investment opportunities, but more importantly, for ECM activities for Asian technology company that would like to come to the US for fundraising. So because we have the full license from SEC and FINRA, so we have been underwriting the IPOs for Asian technology companies, particularly those from China. And since last year, because the SPAC is such a big thing, so we are half of a pipeline now is a SPAC IPO and also the de-SPAC transaction. So that's really our firm's focus. So now after many years working for big corporates from Deloitte, from GE, Deutsche, and so on the road to become an entrepreneur.
Yes. Well, and Xiaoyan, I think you lead into one of the questions that we want to ask for anybody who wants to chime in from the panel, which is, a lot of our students, specifically on the MBA side, they may not immediately go into entrepreneurship or, starting their own investment firm. They may go be a consultant at Deloitte or another large corporation. And so really it'd be interesting to get anybody's perspective on what made you want to be an entrepreneur, what made you want to start your own investment firm, within your journey. So anybody want to share kind of what made you want to be an entrepreneur?
Oh, okay. I mean, I can share a little bit of my background. I mean, just because I think to become entrepreneur, you need some kind of pull and push factor to work at the same time. For me personally, that's how it happened in 2018 when I left the big bank and tried to start the new firm. The push factor at the time is the old employer, they didn't feel as confident as me about the future of the business, of this particular business. But that's where my heart belongs to. So I feel like, you know, because I have the resources, I do have the experience and then a client network, and it'd be a waste if I stay there, do something else, which I would not enjoy as much. So, so I do have both of the pull and push factor. And after I did it, I feel like, yeah, when you start a firm, you actually really can maximize the utilization of your, the network you have accumulated for after so many years. So for me in particular, this is the reason I choose to fund the company.
Awesome. Prashant, anything to add to that?
I'll just say, so I have always wanted since early childhood, if you will, to be an entrepreneur, have my own business. Ended up spending 19 years in corporate world, which most of my classmates in school or college would or not would have I myself expected to do. But the variety of factors then that come into picture, obviously, what I was doing was enjoying a lot, increasing levels of responsibility. It was quite entrepreneurial within Goldman Sachs. Asset management as entrepreneurial as it could have been, and my sort of boutique kind of feel to the business that I was running. The fact that is numerous times thought of doing so, but once you get married and have kids and as the responsibilities increase, the threshold level keeps on, the bar keeps on going higher. And there is a certain, you know, level of comfort or nest egg that you feel you got to build that takes care of the schooling and other, you know, living expenses. And that took a certain while. And as soon as I felt that was, you know, in place, all things came together and decided to finally kick it off.
Great. Yeah, no, I think you bring up some very valid points with the idea of personal life and professional life coming into play with entrepreneurship. You know, Austin, would love to hear from you in your perspective. You know, has entrepreneurship changed since your time at Owen? Anything you can share around your perspective on that topic?
Oh yeah, thank you, Stacie. Well, you know, when I started my own business, that's you know, more than 20 years ago. You know, certainly, and I focus on the high tech area, and things just change so fast, right? So I would say the overall environment, industry landscape, technology, all that have changed dramatically. I mean, I would say, you know, today you think about 20 years ago, or if it's 20 years ago, you think about now, it's a lot of things just unconceivable, right? So obviously, there are so many things changed. But then, in terms of entrepreneurship, I think the fundamental spirits remain the same, right? So if you want to be successful, you got to focus on the big trend, right? The paradigm shift, all that, and then you got to be patient, right? You pick a sector, pick a market segment, and then invest, spend time, and be patient with that, right? And if you are founders, I guess a lot of our panelists are founding members of different organizations. Then you have different people, right? You got to attract the most brilliant people, right? Or the people you respect and you want to work with. So those, I think, are the areas I would say will be the same. Overall entrepreneurship, the spirits, the drive for excellence, all that stay the same.
Yeah, No, that's great, especially the patience piece.
Mhm.
Anand or anybody else want to
Yeah.
add anything?
Sure. I think, if you look at sort of the last 20, 25 years, I think the big change in this part of the world is really sort of access to institutional capital for entrepreneurs. One of the big things, as the point that Prashant made, this is sort of, I would say, my second crack at trying to do my own business. I started one in 2003 for a brief period in a partnership with Morgan Stanley. And, at that point in time, the ability to attract capital to support that business was fairly limited. So you really had to sort of dip into all your savings to really try and do that. And then when you sort of have very young kids and all these other things, you think hard about sort of making the move, especially from a large organization like Morgan Stanley, where you're pretty well set up to sort of take that plunge. But I did do it, and for a variety of reasons, I had the opportunity to sell that business and start a business from scratch at Standard Chartered, which was quite exciting to me because Singapore was the global base for the business, and I could build a very large business from scratch, which had its own sort of entrepreneurial sort of element to it. But fast forward to today, a lot of the entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, for instance, and to a certain extent in India as well, have access to sort of institutional capital. The venture capital funds, there's quite a vibrant ecosystem there, not just on the financial side, but just in terms of a much broader set of resources that people can tap into. There's accelerators, there's things like that entrepreneurs can tap into, which we really never had 15, 20 years ago. So I think that's a big shift, and it used to exist obviously in the OECD world, but that is moving to rapidly to Asia. And I'll just touch on Africa for a second, just because I see it as much earlier in that phase of evolution, which is what prompted us to set up a credit fund, because there, even a thriving small medium enterprise has no access to even banking and funding on the credit side. So that created an opportunity for us to start a new business there to do it. But you see that evolution in all these emerging markets at different stages. But I think Asia's really getting there now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that perspective. The next question is really for anybody that wants to answer, but really talking about entrepreneurship in Asia. And as an entrepreneur, do you see any differences between entrepreneurship in Asia versus entrepreneurship in the US? Any differences?
Stacie, maybe I can share a little bit of that because right now I'm situated in New York, and I'm just serving a lot of Asian clients, and I can probably do a little bit of comparison. And since I started a company, I do get a lot of visitors too, from particularly from Hong Kong, that in the financial services entrepreneurship as well, and then they normally say that it's from a regulatory perspective, meaning not really the regulation background, because we are in the financial industry, as Anand and Prashant, it's heavily regulated, especially in the US, right? So for example, we get audited by FINRA, the financial services body audit. I mean, not all the time, but the first audit we did every 6 months, and then we have to do every 2 years, and after, if you pass it then after that it will be every 3 years, and all the audit is just very detailed. So I'm not talking about that kind of oversight, government organizations, and really making sure that we're in compliance of things. What I'm talking about is really the policy changes. So if since I'm here, I don't have to deal with all that sudden changes of policy so much as those entrepreneurs in Asia, particularly in China, if you're in asset management, anything to do with capital, fundraising or deployment, and it just, you know, from time to time there's a new rule, you have to go adapt to the new rule. So in the US, I think it's general more mature in that sense. This is for financial services, but even for technology companies, as I have been serving for the past 3 years, many of the technology companies out of Asia, out of China, and I feel like, you know, the uncertainty of policies are just so much more in Asia than in the US. So especially for the past, you know, 6 months, you see what's happening in China. Pretty much every week there's a new sector that somehow cracked down by the government. So it's I think comparatively, I look at the technology company here and there in Asia, and I feel like what's really like an impediment for their growth in China is unpredictable policy changes.
Mm. That's a really good point, especially for any of our listeners. You know, Prashant, do you have any other perspective on that particular question?
Just to add to what Anand mentioned earlier, the availability of capital, I think it's improved dramatically. And at this time in our industry, I would say, particularly public equities, which we are in, I think the capital is more available relative to US. So in 20 years ago, capital was very scarce compared to, let's say, the OECD, as Anand mentioned. At least at this point in time, maybe reflective of where the markets have been last couple of years. I think capital availability is something that is in favor of someone who wants to start today in India, especially, and maybe more broadly true for Asia, in contrast to the US. So that's the reverse of what I would say it has been for most part of the last 25 odd years. Also, if you view that in context of the overall cost of starting the business, and while cost of failure is still you know, not dramatically different, but especially for someone who's let's say relatively early in their career. In India, one thing that is different is this, I've just had 2 people within the last 2 months on my team leave to start on their own, very early in their career. I don't know whether they've crossed 30 even. Both are single, kids, no kids. So when I talk to them, like, why are they leaving? They're like, look, right now I can try it out for 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. If I fail, I can always get back into this job. I'm living with my parents. I don't have any home loan to pay. I have no kids or no other responsibility, and I can always get back in. So the cost of starting or failing is much lower for them, and the availability of capital, I think, is much better today relative to, say, the Western world, where the cost could be higher, and the availability of capital at this time might not be as easy as in India or Asia.
Stacie, I might want to just add another,
Please, yeah,
slightly different take on this, really to picking up from Xiaoyan's point on sort of uncertainty of policies. But another big part of sort of doing business in this part of the world is sort of the applicability or the enforcement of legal contracts. So whether it's in most places in Africa, a lot of places in Southeast Asia, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, it becomes super important that the people you do business with, you have a deep level of trust and a strong relationship with, because the contract that you have with anyone is very hard to enforce. So, you know, building those networks and having deep relationships becomes that much more important. And who you do business with is probably as important as what you invest in for us as investors, because you know, we can have any shareholder agreement we want with any of our investee companies, but it's not, it really, it would just be a quagmire that you can never get out of if you've picked the wrong partner. So personal relationship networks are super important compared to the OECD world, where you can, believe that there will be some respect to the to contracts. So it's just another element that adds to the complexity of doing business in this part of the world. And I'm sure, Austin, you probably have experienced this in many ways in your own business.
Yeah, Stacie, if it's okay, I'll add
Love it,
a few comments on that point. Now, actually, the first point I want to echo is which Anand and Prashant just mentioned, talk about the availability of capital. In China, I think it's similar things happened during the past 20 years or more than 20 years. For instance, when I started ONET, that's year 2000. The capital industry in China, the venture capital, the private equity, all that. I wouldn't say it did not exist, but it's just very small scale, very hard to raise capital. During the early years, my personal experience, we have to rely on banking, the bank loans for financing more than raising capital, the equity. But then talk about today, in China, the private equity, the venture capital industry are very advanced. So meaning the entrepreneurs, the young entrepreneurs who you want to do something today versus like what I was doing 20 years ago, you have a great advantage, at least in terms of availability of capital. Okay, that's something that I would say during the past 20 years, things changed a lot. And then in terms of entrepreneurship in Asia versus the rest of the world, I think it's in China, it's the same thing. The political system is different. The culture factor is also different. People, I still remember, back 20 years ago when I moved back from New York to Hong Kong, talking about doing business in Asia. We hear a lot of talks about how to building up relationships in China, because relationship is the only thing you can count on back in those days. I think now, well, the legal system is developing. The country have made so much progress. Relationship probably not that as important as 20 years ago, but I would say still a important factor when you're making business decisions and arranging corporate development in China.
That's that's very helpful. And I think you all touched on some of the elements that lead into this next question, which is just specific to trends or looking at trends. And so you kind of talked about macro trends in the sense of access to capital's increased, all of that. What do you all think is one trend you see in the future of entrepreneurship in Asia? What would be one trend you could see coming on the horizon in your perspective?
Stacie, if I may.
Please jump on in.
Well, I would say again, pick the right industry sector. Okay, I would strongly recommend the probably two. The first one, talk about the electric vehicle, right? And the associated components, parts. It's a couple of days ago, I saw a research report talking about the new automobile sales in China. The electric vehicle represent, I think, close to 15% of the total cars sold in China last quarter, which that's really surprised me. I always thought you got 1-2%. It's a fad, by young people. But then people talk about it's already 15%. And then there's a bullish forecast is next year it could go to 30%. So there is a battery company in China called CATL. Xiaoyan probably know better than I do, but I heard that the market cap is like 1 trillion RMB. So that's something I think, back like my days, I'm still doing fiber optics, because back 20 years ago, fiber optics is something really hot in the global market. But then now people talk about electric car, and associated like the new energy, even LiDAR, being part of that. I know Elon Musk is not a fan of LiDAR, but it's the company is listed on NASDAQ, Luminar AI, and the Innovace, all those are small startup, multi-billion-dollar market cap, all that. So that would be a sector I would, for the new ambitious young entrepreneurs, you should look at that. Okay, and then the other one, of course, is the metaverse, right? The AI, the artificial intelligence, the augmented reality or virtual reality, all that. A lot of industry leaders already investing in that. To me, I think that's another thing. It may, they could be another, just like the internet or the mobile internet, which is the next big thing. So young entrepreneurs, if you are 30 years old, if you have a lot of time to spend and invest in, that's the area to jump in.
Thank you. Great perspective. Anyone else want to jump in and provide info?
I can probably share a little bit, just given we have been in contact with so many Chinese companies that come here for IPO, right, for capital markets transactions. So if you think about one of the objective, I guess, right, along the line after become entrepreneur is to, make it bigger and take it public, for example, right? If that's one of the goals, and you would, change the perspective from a capital markets perspective. How do you look at those companies at early stage? And so our firm has underwritten all different kind of companies IPO. Like we did the biggest LGBT social media app in China. It's called Blue City, and we did also this underwriting the second largest user generated content voice streaming company called Lizhi. And then also did interestingly the third largest mining blockchain mining company, but it's a mining machine company manufacturer out of China. So I basically take all that and also look at the pipeline we work on today. I really, from the new startups and perspective, I really resonate with what Austin just said. There's a lot of focus on EV right now in China and battery companies too. So because we work on SPAC and de-SPAC transactions, the majority of those assets to be potentially put into a SPAC and merge with a SPAC actually fall into the EV industry or the ecosystem, somewhere, either as a service provider or as a battery provider or as the algorithm, the service provider also, right? They don't necessarily make the car, but they are the one that develop the software for the car. Since like it's pretty much around that. So EV is a big thing. And if they're in a new kind of new retail, new consumer space, which has been growing a lot in China, you can imagine there are so many I don't know. I mean, in Southeast Asia also, milk tea is a big thing, right? Nai cha, right? It's a big thing. And in China, you look at how many milk tea companies are coming out every day. So it's just, it's a huge trend, and then to identify new products that would would satisfy the appetite of the Chinese consumers. And this general trend is, if you can find, if you can do something better, cheaper, and give them deliver to them faster. I think that's really where globally, right? That's a trend. Like in the US, it's the same thing. Why Amazon is doing so well, because they're doing everything, better, cheaper, and faster. So I would say that, if you want to be in an entrepreneurship in Asia, that's probably something you want to look at. And Peter Thiel's book 021 is a huge hit, right, in Asia many years ago. Everybody talk about it. So you just have to choose your area where you think you can dominate in a short period of time in a particular space.
Thank you. Prashant, would you have anything to add?
Just, I think along the lines of what we already discussed, to your question of trend, I think compared to the past, what I see a lot more is entrepreneurs very willing to dilute very early on, which is in a way, corollary to venture capital and private equity financing. When we meet with companies of, let's say, a couple of decades ago or so, they tend to be 100% or 80% plus owned by the founders, entrepreneurs, whereas the new age companies you meet with, the entrepreneurs own at times 1 to 2% of the company, and they've rapidly diluted as they build scale. So it's like a mindset change. Rather than owning 100% of one, they're comfortable owning 1% of 100 in a way. And the goal is to build rapid scale ahead of any competition in many of the new age tech areas. And that's a big, I would say, mindset change that I observe in company promoters, founders.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And maybe Stacie, just to wrap that question up from my end, one of the other things we look at is sort of again, sort of more macro trends in relation to what's happening in Asia. You obviously have the politics, the global political situation. So what we're seeing a fair bit of is a lot of companies in the OECD world adopting a China plus one strategy, rather than having all their manufacturing or sourcing out of China. So Southeast Asia and India are potential beneficiaries from that trend. And it's creating a big ecosystem, both in India and places like Vietnam and Indonesia, etc., that are sort of providing that that alternative. So we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurship arise from a result of sort of companies having sort of a strategic shift as a result of sort of the unfortunate politics that we're all encountering in the world. And the other big trend that we see is that this, and it's sort of what Austin initially referred to, which is really a lot of Asian countries are leapfrogging technologies, right? You've gone, just like it was impossible to get a landline, so and you had to wait for 10 years in India to get a landline, but now the people have leapfrogged and sort of everyone has a mobile phone. Similarly, in areas like banking, etc., mobile banking, where you've had such low banking penetration in many of these economies, those are just leapfrogging sort of legacy sort of businesses that existed even in the West. So that's another area that we see as a sort of big trend, where we look at how certain economies can actually leapfrog technologies and grow very quickly So that's another area that I think we keep an eye on when we look at opportunities in our footprint.
That's great. And at this point, I think it's a good time to pause. We're going to actually jump to some Q&A that relates to this topic. But then also, if anybody who's participating has a question, please feel free to jump in from a Q&A perspective. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can. And so the first one is actually for Anand. So Lionel mentioned, he mentioned, thank you for sharing some of the information. He admires your passion and vision in providing people from emerging markets with basic financial services. And so with the rise of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, do you see it as a technology that could accelerate the vision of banking, the unbanked? So any thoughts as it relates to that question?
Sure. I mean, I guess the big sort of unknown I think crypto is here to stay. It is a big asset class already. There's a ton of interest in it. But the big unknown is really the regulatory framework adopted in Asia to deal with it. And so you've seen China looking at banning it, India looking at banning it at some level. Singapore has adopted it wholeheartedly. So, you have a big disconnect between each of these economies and how they're dealing with it. So I think the jury is a little bit out still. But the fundamental interest in this asset class is huge. And, I probably, we tend to invest in more mature businesses, so I'm probably not at the cutting edge of every development in the crypto world, but on a big picture, when we look at it, this is kind of how we're looking at it. We're just adopting a bit of a wait and see to see how some of the regulators react to this before it can make a real impact on sort of banking.
Great, thank you for that answer. Prashant, a question for you. How do you think about the carbon neutral movement? Is it a bubble? Will you invest in startups related to carbon neutral business with higher valuation than usual? Any thoughts on that question?
No, certainly. So while we invest mostly in public listed companies, our investments public listed companies, but to answer the questions, no, I don't think the whole move towards, if I say more broadly, sustainability, ESG is a component of that, carbon neutral, importance of climate responsibility. These are, I think, here to stay and become more and more important, and we should all be very thankful for that. Maybe at 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, when I first started coming across, particularly in Northern Europe, is where I found this, if I were to say originated earliest, the importance that clients started placing around environmental and social issues. At that time, I was more unsure for how long it would last, but it has gained momentum every passing day, and it seems to be something that would grow exponentially in importance over time. To the question of whether we would pay something higher, see, it's purely from a what you learn in school, in college, DCF basis, corporates. It is something that you have to value a little, higher, because if a company is doing something very appropriately aligned to all the sustainability goals, then the profitability of that company, because assuming that in doing so, they are having to spend more or absorb greater costs. So the cash flows of those companies are more sustainable because they're already ahead of, say, competition, which may not be complying with the highest standards. But the competition would have to, in future, get its act right and fall in line and comply with. And as and when they do so, they would have to bear the cost of doing, be it environmental compliance or any other of those topics. So all else equal, a company which is more compliant and conducting its business in a more sustainable manner, we would value those cash flows higher than the same cash flows for another company which is not doing so.
Got it. Thank you. Got a lot of Q&A questions coming in, which is fantastic. The next question, Xiaoyan, if you could answer. So far, we've talked about risk tolerance and promising sectors for success. Of the many skills that we learn in business school, what 2 or 3 do you think were the most important to you as it relates to entrepreneurship in Asia?
Well, 20 years ago when I was at Owen, I think we definitely had a bias when we look at the course selection, or like who would take the organizational skills, right? Who would take the marketing classes, right? I know marketing is still remain our core class at the time, but the Asian, I think students at that time, I don't know what they're doing today. Or like we gotta learn finance, right? We gotta learn accounting. We gotta learn, all those, really hardcore financial skills, right? As opposed to marketing organization. Now I thought back and, now I've become entrepreneur and, different from working for big corporates like GE, BNP, all the where you are more of a specialized worker there. You only focus on your little area, no matter even, I was, head of investment banking for that particular sector, but I only care about that sector. And then you only care about the front running business. I don't need to know what's in the, what's in the background, what's in the back office, mid office, right? What do we need to do, right? I only need to go get the deal, and I get the deal done. I don't even know how to collect the money, for example, right? So and you don't have to deal with so many of the internal organizational stuff. And I just feel like, now I thought about it, and I think if you are in school, I would suggest that, the Chinese students, that is the bias is not so much focused on finance, accounting. I mean, those are important. Those classes are important. But I think equally important, if you really want to become an entrepreneur, is the marketing classes, organizational behavior classes, because once you become an entrepreneur, you are pretty much, everybody for everything, right? And it's like Elon Musk, what Elon Musk will talk about also last 2 weeks ago, there was a video circling around and said, if you need the other people's encouragement, you should not start your company. So basically talk about all this, resilience also as as an entrepreneur. So I think taking those organizational classes and, entrepreneurship in general, introduction as well, what does it mean to be entrepreneur, from the business school class perspective, I think those classes will be very helpful for you become an entrepreneur.
Fantastic. Austin, in your mind, if, for Owen students who are interested in returning to Asia to start a business, what do you think that they should do while they're in the US?
Well, Stacie, my personal experience, I actually worked at Solomon and Citigroup for quite a few years before I started my own. My advice, I would say it's probably not good to start on your own right away out of MBA program. Okay, I would say probably join a successful organization, a big organization or small, but someone who are successful, which and you respect. Okay, and then accumulate work experience, both work and life experience actually for I would say at least 5 years, and then because after that you will understand yourself better. Because I would always say, you know, when I talk to my young colleagues or that, if you want to do something different, or pursue something you want to do, you got to understand who you are, you know, your personality, your goal. And young people, you need life experience to understand that, okay? Because I guess today we talk about entrepreneurship, but you know, I would say when you join a professional organization, you start your career, you always the two options, right? Well, one is entrepreneurship, right? Sounds glorious and then promising, and then another option is stay with the organization and grow, and then climb up the organizational ladder, right? I would say both are you know, good choices if that's something you want to do, you know. But I would say nobody would think Jack Welch, you know, he stay at GE, right? Built GE to, you know, I think actually that was for our time when I was in the US. You know, GE was one of the most successful companies in the world, and then Jack Welch didn't start something on his own, right? He just you know, built his successful career within GE, and then later became the CEO and probably one of the most successful CEOs in the US corporate history. So that I wouldn't rule out that as a good option. Okay, so again, back to my earlier point, it's really depend upon your personality, you know, your goal for life, and if it is something you want to I want to start something on my own, I want to take the risk, or that, well, okay, then after, you know, a few years in a big organization, accumulated enough life and work experience, and then if you feel that's something I want to do, then jump in, right? So my advice, I guess, is don't make a rush decision.
Thank you. Thank you. Prashant, you have something to add?
I think Austin's coming from a very learned and experienced perspective. He started quite early, right? In 2000, after graduating in mid-90s, 95 or 96, as you mentioned, Austin. Maybe if to balance off Austin's perspective, having done the other extreme in a way, spending 19 years in corporate, well, I felt that I took too long. In fact, much better to have started straight away from school, maybe made mistakes, because those mistakes are also great learning experience. What Xiaoyan was earlier saying, just learning about in the corporate world, you're in a certain area developing strong expertise, no doubt, but having to manage operations, having to handle, delegate, manage, learn about, understand the very strong importance of all these various functions, legal, ops, compliance, marketing. That learning is extremely valuable. And if you go through that learning for a year and two, you succeed, great, keep building on. Don't succeed, you can always join a corporate, and that learning would be still very valuable so if you have to make an error on one side, too much experience versus no experience, based on my experience, I would say better to make the other error of starting too early. And to Eric's question on what you would do, I think if you were to, there are a lot of things from US also you can do. One of the things, and if I were to do my MBA again at Owen, I would do a lot of things very differently, rather than focusing on grades as much as let's say I ended up doing, would focus a lot more on building your network, get to know a lot more of your classmates very properly, and otherwise build a broader network while you are in the US. because at least in financial services, I can say a lot of, there's tremendous potential in almost any financial services business that you enter in, and you'll end up interacting a lot with some counterpart or the other, most likely clients as well in the US. So spend a lot more time in networking. And then as Xiaoyan was saying earlier, take variety of courses, not just financial courses, but if you were to go down the entrepreneurial route, take human resource coursework, take organizational behavior courses, and a negotiation course I find was very useful under Professor Friedman when I took that. Take operations course, and all variety, and maybe outside of Owen as well. Vanderbilt is a very large and rich variety of coursework that they offer. Legal, law-related courses. I've taken one law course in Owen that's extremely insightful. And those are all the things you can leverage from university.
Thank you, Prashant. And you know, one of the big things I think that's become clear is that there's no right, quote unquote, right answer, right? If you start early, you start later, there's pros and cons to each. So I know we have several other questions that have come in. We are at that, depending on what location you're at, we're about 5 minutes over our previously scheduled time. I know our panelists have said that they can stay on and answer questions. If you have to drop off for whatever reason, you know, feel free to do that. We understand it. We'll keep recording this. The recording will be made available for everybody after the fact. And I would also really highly suggest, before we go into answering the rest of the questions, that anybody that is listening in, connect with our panelists on LinkedIn. You know, all of them are on LinkedIn. They're Vanderbilt alums. And I know, you know, would be more than willing to connect with you all, and potentially, even if questions come up, you know, maybe be able to answer those offline as well. So with that, anybody that can stay on, please, we'll continue to answer questions. And going back to our Q&A, Prashant, somebody had a question for you. This question is around the horizon of individual investing in emerging markets such as India. So should individual or retail investors pursue active fund managers for deploying their capital who persevere to beat the markets? Or should they just stick to the Warren Buffett principles of index investing? For example, Vanguard S&P 500, you know, index fund.
So it's a very existential question for an active, so can't hide from the fact that it's my answer can be biased and conflicted. Having given that caveat, I believe that it's just like, you know, investing directly in stocks. If you don't know anything about investing directly in stocks, you're better off investing in index fund. Same way, if you don't know anything about hiring or choosing or selecting the right active manager, you might be better off investing in passive fund. Now in US, the reality is, and the statistics are, that the average manager underperforms. Even the top quartile manager underperforms S&P 500 in the large cap. So it's much more difficult in US to outperform because it's a more efficient market. And same way, it's much more difficult to find a manager who can succeed over time and add value. Whereas there are many studies out there in the public domain that show that in emerging markets, the alpha generated by an average manager is quite substantial, and hence there might be merit in selecting a fund manager. So what Mr. Buffett has said is, I think, a lot more applicable to the US market than for an emerging market like India.
Great, thank you. That was wonderful. And I know Xiaoyan had to drop off, but thank you so much, Xiaoyan, for joining us. And in case any other panelist needs to drop off at some point, thank you all for joining us. Derek, thank you for being here as well. And so just a few more questions, if you all can hang in there. So it's great that we have this much engagement, especially either if it's really late or really early in the morning. So I love it. So Anand, this question's for you. So with the recent advancement made in fintech across Africa, what do you think the trends look like going into the future, especially from your perspective of different emerging markets?
Yeah, so on Africa, I think one of the things that we're seeing is this whole concept of leapfrogging, for instance, using mobile channels to develop the entire financial ecosystem, because the traditional brick and mortar banks don't even exist. And if they do, they're very constrained in terms of their size and ability to do much. So the future of the financial sector in Africa is largely mobile. And so in the form that it takes, either in the form of a super app that a lot of people are trying to replicate, sort of the Chinese experience through Alibaba and other companies, people are going to try and replicate that in Africa. And I think it's a function of two things. One, obviously, smartphone penetration is also increasing. As smartphone penetration increases, you will have a greater adoption of these technologies. And similarly in Southeast Asia, and I'll probably leave Prashant, who's the India expert, to talk about India. But in Southeast Asia, each country is at a different stage of evolution. But where you have under penetration of basic financial services, mobile banking is becoming sort of, or just the whole financial sector inclusion is really taking place through mobile, and Indonesia is a great example of that, and we're starting to see that in Vietnam and other places like that as well.
Great perspective. Couple more questions. So this one I think is particularly interesting, and it's specific about culture on entrepreneurship in Asia. So Byron says, I read an article once that highlighted that the fear of failure in years past was somewhat a stumbling block for many, as society was very critical of failure, as opposed to the West, where people try to fail and try again and so on. And so anyone's perspective on how, that the cultural differences between maybe the US or Asia could potentially impact entrepreneurship.
Stacie, if I may,
please.
I guess I can talk a little bit about China, and later the other panelists, maybe they can share their leverage on their experience. I would say, at least for China, this is not a big factor at all, although it's not an issue. I guess back in maybe 20, 30 years ago, before the reform started in China, the conservative culture, and back then, I guess probably the young people don't even have a chance to start something. Okay, but now the young generations are really ambitious. Even I personally see a lot of new startups just probably on a daily basis. The young people have an idea, they come up, they go to angel investor, venture capitalists raising money, but of course a big portion of that ended up failed. Okay, and then Anand and Prashant probably know better than I do. The venture capital, I think in China probably the same thing for like the rest of the world, only 10-20% being somewhat successful, and then the large majority ended up failed. But those young people, then they And back to Prashant's point, I guess it's not that critical. It's not something really to worry about if you failed. You can either start something again, or you join another big organization to another different career. So culturally, I would say, at least in China, it's the society is much more open, and it's not an issue.
I would agree with what Austin saying about India as well, and Anand, great to hear if you would have a different opinion on that. But having lived for 11 years in the US as well, I don't see a material difference on that count. In fact, some people, while as at Goldman, they would, because there would be people, often were leaving to start on their own from the India office. So some of those would wonder, why is it that from India office, so many people would leave to start on their own? So I don't think that that's, at least as in case of China, would be applicable to India.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that Asian parents still apply a huge premium on education. So they will pay any amount of money to get their kids as good an education as they can afford. But when we were growing up, you either had to be an accountant, doctor, lawyer. There are only a few sort of professions that were considered acceptable from a parental standpoint. I think that has also shifted. So the Asian parents still apply a huge premium on education, but where that education leads you, I think they've formed a much broader view of that, or as they've seen examples of people being successful in many other spheres. The other element is governments are changing their views. Singapore has probably, it breaks all the records in terms of math and science and things like that. But the biggest problem they felt was they put so much pressure on the children when they were so young that they've made them too structured in their thinking. So now they're trying to change the education systems in a lot of these countries to try and sort of embrace a little bit more creativity in the way people are educated, so that they can be more comfortable taking some of these risks. And I think they're trying to do it in Korea. They're trying to do it in Singapore. So I see some of those trends, where the people, the ecosystem, the governments, the parents, they're all trying to sort of either broaden their view to try and allow children to have the right mindset to be able to take those risks, rather than suppress it too young in the sort of development.
Awesome, thank you. And Anand, this is a question for you. Is post COVID-19, due to moderated order books, the business ecosystem is more prone to ethics and governance frauds, especially in the emerging markets. So what's your take in managing the commercial risks, especially related to ethics and compliance, while doing cross-border transaction?
It's like I said, sometimes in our business, who you invest in is probably as important as the business you're investing in. So we spend a lot of time in diligencing sort of the background of the people we invest in, and also when we do invest, we spend a lot of time trying to sort of help build their overall corporate governance standards in terms of transparency, in terms of a whole range of sort of basic systems and processes that have some checks and balances. But I don't think COVID-19 itself was changed that very much. It's really sort of an evolutionary process from an emerging market for a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, look at countries like Vietnam, where, you know, it's been a communist country for so long, they're suddenly opening up to free market systems. There are no established norms on how things are done. So trying to sort of help guide that process is sort of an important part of what we try to do. Obviously, successful you hope you're successful in all cases, but not always the case. You always have issues that you need to deal with.
For sure. Thank you for that. You know, Prashant, this question, and Austin and/or Anand, shedding some light on how an MBA helped with your ventures and made your ventures more successful than they would have been otherwise. So do you all think that, you know, having an MBA, or what role did that play in your venture success?
Certainly, Susie, there is clearly the element of what you learn there. In financial services, obviously, I come from engineering background. So a lot of what I learned as to the you know, theoretical aspects, market related aspects, some of that, obviously, as simple as doing a DCF, you know, at Owen, and those are very helpful. But also, I think beyond that, what is very helpful is the confidence that you also get that, okay, you don't know something that you must know for success. Just having that confidence that there isn't anyone else out there who has some special knowledge or skill that you might have missed out on. That itself is a big confidence booster, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I always say kind of clarity, confidence, community, right? Those are kind of three things you can get with an MBA that you may not have prior to.
Absolutely.
So that's great. One last question to wrap it up. And I think this question kind of built off the question around Asian culture. And Anand, I think what you said specifically about kind of the shift that you see potentially from, you know, Asian parents. So Michael mentioned, you know, as a younger Asian American who is trained as a clinician, he's currently in the executive MBA program. Do you have any advice for folks considering a job change, i.e., you know, leaving clinical leadership and planning to go into more business leadership, or even potentially entrepreneurship? So any advice, and it doesn't just have to be Anand, but any of you having advice for that question?
Well, you know, we by sheer coincidence, we own the largest clinic chain business in Singapore. So we have 100 clinics. We've got a lot of doctors, and we had a doctor running who switched from sort of practicing to running a business. But we think that when we're looking for our next CEO, we'll be looking for someone not necessarily being a medical expert, but really someone who's got some basic knowledge, but really someone with sort of business skills to really look at growing the business. So I think it really is a function of figuring out how you leverage your base knowledge. Prashant's an engineer, and you know, he's about as far away from his basic engineering than you can imagine. So I don't think that I think, you know, follow sort of your interests, and you can always leverage your background.
Great perspective.
If I just add a few things on top of what Anand just mentioned, I think for you know, moving from on the question, the moving from the clinical job to the business side, again, it's really it requires totally different skill sets. And then it depends upon the personal career interest. You know, either side can be successful, but if he or she wants to move to the business aspect, then I think at least he or she is making the right decision going to the executive MBA program, learning the strategy, the marketing, the business lessons. So
Great.
It's a great point. So one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. So this question just came in for Prashant, and it says, as the reports say, more than 50% of the USA population invests in stock markets, whereas in India, only 4% invest. What could be the reason behind it? And do you see the percent of the Indian investors increasing in the near future, or will there be a decline further? What's your perspective?
No, America has a great investing culture, I would say, compared to, if you were to compare to European or other developed countries, these numbers can vary considerably, surprisingly. So Germany has, for example, a lot lower in terms of investment into equity markets. In India, it's not reached a stable state yet. It is still moving higher. It's much higher today than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago was higher than 20 years ago. So when I first initially in 2003, 2004 told my then boss in Goldman that I want to go to India and start an asset management company myself, the total asset management, which is the retail mutual fund business, was only $4 billion in equities. There's a team that I was on was managing $30 billion in the US at Goldman, right? So it was a fraction of what one team within Goldman was managing. Today, that $4 billion has gone, I think, somewhere near $200 billion. So it's seen a 40-fold, 50-fold jump. And obviously, that's much, much higher than what developed world has seen. And this, in the next 20 years, I think it can, again, go up, if not 40 times, it can go up, 10, 20 times. I'd be very disappointed if it only goes up 10, 20 times. And that's because of the increasing participation in the equity markets, direct, but also through mutual funds. That is an ongoing process. And that's partly related to where we are on the development curve and standard of living and the total income. And as that grows, the equity participation would grow higher. Difficult to say where we settle down, whether it's Germany or US, but in either case, there's a very long way to go.
Thank you for that perspective. All right, so before we wrap up, Derek, Austin, Anand, Prashant, anything else you want to add that we didn't discuss that might be beneficial for anyone listening?
Hey, Stacie, I would just like to say this
please.
is amazing, right? It's just a great panel, and I appreciate you leading it. You did a brilliant job. Great panel. Xiaoyan was sending me messages on the side here saying, I really enjoyed it. I hate I had to leave. So anyway, just a big, huge thank you. You had great participation. Glad everyone's here. I would encourage you, everyone who wants to be a part of what we're doing in Asia, stay connected with us, right? Everybody on here is part of the alumni board in Asia, and we're all owners. You are and we are of what we do for Owen in Asia. And so please stay connected with us, right? Because we want to continue the momentum that we saw here tonight. So thank you very much. And thank you, Stacie, for hosting this.
Absolutely. Anytime. This was such a pleasure. I so loved meeting all of you and hearing your perspective on a topic that I'm not even well versed in. So you all taught me something tremendous. So yes, thank you all for taking part in this. We appreciate you. And hopefully this won't be the last. I have no doubt. So hope you have a great rest of your day and week.